So I think I know most of the people on this call, so thanks so much for joining. My name is Katie McLean, and I am the program manager with Clean Annapolis River Project. And let me figure out how to change slides here. Um, I imagine many of you are already familiar with our organization, but in case you're not, we're a community-based non-government organization, and we're driven by our mission, which is to enhance the ecological health of the Annapolis River watershed for current and future generations through science, leadership, and community engagement. And we are just coming into our field season. So we're already starting to see migratory birds return, and people have reported their first observations of spring peepers and salamanders out on salamander night. So this presentation is meant to give people a preview of the types of field-based programs that we have coming up for the spring and summer season, and hopefully recruit a few new individuals into the programs. So again, it's going to be pretty informal tonight, and I'm going to keep things quite high level. So we'll go over 3 different programs. The first will be forested wetland breeding bird surveys. The second is going to be wood turtle visual surveys. And the third is FrogWatch. And with each of these programs, I've broken it down by the objective of the program, where it takes place, when does it take place, in a general sense, how do you do it, the additional training needs and opportunities, and then other considerations. And again, I encourage you, if you have questions as we go through, don't hesitate to ask questions either by unmuting or typing in the chat box. So I just have to reorganize my own screen so I can see what I'm showing you. So the first program that I am going to give an overview for is our forested wetland breeding bird surveys. This is a program that has come to be as a result of partnerships with Dr. Cindy Stacer, who is a retired professor at Dalhousie University and has spent many years researching a wide variety of different species, but huge amount of effort on breeding birds that use forested wetland habitats. And so the overall objective of volunteer engagement in this program is to support that ongoing research and the related conservation efforts. So right now we have a project that we're working on in partnership with Dr. Stacer as well to develop special management practices for woodlot owners who may have these species and are trying to manage their woodlots for ecological and biodiversity values, as well as timber and other values. So this program has 4 target species, but definitely gives you an opportunity to see a lot more. And the target species for this year are the olive-sided flycatcher, the eastern wood pewee, the rusty blackbird, and Canada warbler. So when I do a more detailed training session on this program, we'll talk about the specific habitat types that each of these uses. There's some similarities in that they use forested wetlands for breeding, but they use different types of forested wetlands and look for different types of characteristics when they're selecting their nest sites. So this is a great program because it provides an opportunity for people across the province to participate. So while our focus is on recruiting volunteers to cover sites within the Annapolis River watershed, so that area that extends roughly from Digby up through Aylesford and bounded by the North and South Mountain, Dr. Stacer's work takes place province-wide, and people can select to monitor at forested wetlands near wherever they live. So there's a lot of flexibility in site selection as long as you can get to a forested wetland. And in Nova Scotia, that's usually not too challenging. So we do have a number of historical sites which we hope to find volunteers to help cover, to look at whether those species have persisted at that site. But we're also looking to expand the known number of sites that these species are using. So really anyone could participate if they found a site that seemed reasonably suitable and wanted to go and check it out. And we are able to help people in identifying sites. Uh, the, I guess, catch is that these surveys almost always take place in wet areas or adjacent to wet areas. So accessibility can vary pretty greatly. Sometimes you get lucky and you have a nice trail that will lead you into one of these breeding sites. In other cases, it can be quite a slog through a wetland to get to your prospective survey sites. So it may mean that people have to kind of scale or just select sites with their own interests and abilities in mind. So if mobility is a challenge, then probably like a deep woods trek to get to a forested wetland isn't for you, but there may be sites we can look at that have greater road access. So when do the surveys take place? With these, things are coming up pretty quickly. So we have one of our species, the rusty blackbird, which actually tends to arrive a little earlier and begins breeding a little earlier than the other species. So we want to try to get people out by April 24th and have them surveying until about June 30th. With the other set of species, so Canada warbler, olive-sided flycatcher, and eastern wood pewee, the prime survey season is about May 20th through July 20th. And of course, we can't hold birds to breed within these windows, so there's some variability on either end. If people wanted to try their luck later, it gets more challenging. You'll probably have less observations, but certainly earlier if people were eager to get out. You're likely to have some observations then. And in a perfect world, we hope people will visit a selected site between 1 and 3 times as needed to determine breeding bird evidence. So if you go out there on day 1 and you have your positive detection, you're confident that that bird's there, then that's great. We don't actually need you to return again if you're unable to. It'd be great if you can. But if you go out and you don't have a detection, it doesn't mean that that bird's not there. It may have just been you didn't observe them during that visit. So that's why we want the repeated visits. And we have a new puppy down here, so you might be hearing her. Hopefully she's not too noisy. So how do you do it? So these surveys are by ear, so it does require learning calls for the target species. And the survey protocol asks for 10-minute listening periods. So once you arrive at your site, you're going to stand in the same place and you're going to listen. If you know all the birds, that's great, but you can kind of hone in on just the target species, which reduces the number of calls that you need to learn by ear. Another option is that if people are able to get out but don't feel so confident in their ability to identify birds by ear, they can take a recording, and we have some volunteers who aren't able to get out anymore, but more than willing to listen through those recordings and check results or do the initial kind of listening for the target species once they have that back at home. So other thing that might be a catch for some people, if you're not a morning person, might not be the perfect fit because surveys do take place between sunrise until about 5 hours after sunrise. So it's a little generous. You don't have to be up super, super early. You'll probably have more detections the earlier you're out there. You kind of get that like spring chorus early on, but there is some flexibility within that 5-hour period after sunrise. And in terms of training opportunities, we are going to do a virtual session that works through the protocols. So how to fill out the data sheet, reinforcing kind of you go out, you do your 10 minutes. If you're going to use playback, so if you're going to have an audio recording that a target species might respond to in order to increase your chances of a detection, how do you ethically and responsibly use playback? We will also do some small group training. So Dr. Stacer is going to come down, and we have a few volunteers in the Watershed area who've offered to work with small groups of volunteers. They have all the experience and expertise, and they can share that with people to help develop more birds, more birders, I should say. So that would be under the mentorship opportunities there. We will also circulate a package with written protocols and audio links to recordings of the species taken in Nova Scotia. Because one of the challenges you can run into is when you listen to recordings online and they're taken from a different geographic location, sometimes birds have dialects and it's just a little bit different than what you might expect to hear in Nova Scotia. So before I breeze through this program, did anyone have questions about breeding bird surveys at all? I know that was pretty brief. So yes, the biggest thing I want to reiterate about this is you can focus on the target species. You don't have to be a birding expert. I can do these surveys and I'm not a birding expert. So it doesn't require that you list every species on your survey. We're really focused on our targets. And that means you only have, you know, maybe one or two bird calls that you need to learn because you know that the site that you're going to visit is only suitable for those one or two species. So it's a great way to get yourself into a new hobby if you've been wanting to get into learning your bird calls by ear as well. Okay, so here's my other considerations for this program. So it does require some patience. When you're out there, you're standing quietly, listening for your 10-minute window. So it may not be the most suitable program if you have young children who want to participate, but maybe you have the perfect kid for this. It does require completing data forms, and some people don't necessarily like that. We try to keep it minimal, but we do want data that can be used to support research. So there's kind of a bare minimum that needs to be done for the survey forms. That being said, if someone was out and was able to say, you know, I'm pretty sure I heard a Canada warbler here, that would give us a chance to go and check that site out. So there's still value in doing the surveys, even if you're not going to adhere to using the data forms completely. And again, we can help with site selection as well. So people don't need to worry if they're unsure of where to go. So our second program is our wood turtle visual survey program. And we've been working with wood turtles in the Annapolis River watershed since 2012. So the long-term and overall objective of this program is to support and ensure the viability of our wood turtle population in the Annapolis River watershed. So when we're out doing surveys, we're hoping to either resurvey areas where there's been previous effort and we have some information about the individuals who have been observed, as well as to identify new areas where wood turtles have not been previously confirmed. And one of the reasons we do that is it expands the target area when we're working with private landowners on stewardship planning, because we want to make sure we're focusing on places that are going to actually benefit our target species. So we have some flexibility within the watershed in terms of site selection, but it's significantly less flexible than breeding bird monitoring. So wood turtles are a species for which the location data is considered sensitive. So I'm not going to talk too much tonight about specific locations, but we find wood turtles in our watershed roughly from Lawrencetown through Aylesford in little pockets. And so sites would be identified within that area. I know a lot of people are really interested in programs where they get to work with turtles. Usually the biggest challenge is whether they're living or able to travel to this area, making it feasible for them to participate. There are some opportunities to conduct surveys in the St. Mary's River area. So we're working with the Nova Scotia Nature Trust in St. Mary's River Association to kind of share our experience and learning in delivering a wood turtle monitoring program to develop a similar program in their area. So if anyone is listening and St. Mary's River is more in their home territory, then that may be an opportunity that we could look at. But for some people, it may be that they're just not going to be in the right place to help out with wood turtle surveys. Although that being said, we do try to organize the kind of weekend group searches. So there may be a chance to kind of join in on a like for a one-time thing on a weekend. So wood turtle surveys take place usually late April. We want to get started through May. So big thing with wood turtles is once vegetation is high and they're spending a lot of their time on land looking for food, it's incredibly challenging to find them in dense vegetation. So we focus our effort on that time of year when you can still kind of see the ground, but it's warm enough that wood turtles are going to be terrestrially active. So we want to see about 10-degree centigrade temperature days. And so totally depends on the year, but usually late April is when we start to get our reports of our first observations. And these surveys take place during the day. Once we move into June, we shift focus to nesting surveys, which take place in the evening. It's not a perfect rule, but wood turtles typically will nest in the evening. And then in the case that we successfully observe a nest being laid and have an opportunity to use a protective cover, then monitoring of that nest takes place through June to October. After 60 days of those eggs incubating is when we start daily checks for the site. That initial period of time, we don't need to check every day. So wood turtle visual surveys are really great because it's kind of a glorified way of saying you're walking around and looking for turtles. And so you're going to choose a predetermined area and we'll work with you to select those sites. And you're going to move as slowly as your patience will allow looking for turtles. And they can be on land, they could be in aquatic habitat, they could be tucked under vegetation. They're really going to be kind of usually within, we focus our surveys within definitely 20 meters of a water course, but they can move farther away. So sometimes there are sites, particularly when we get towards nesting season, that we might be looking a little further away from water. But we do tend to stick to the riparian area, so that area adjacent to a river when we're selecting our survey sites. And in the case that a wood turtle is found, then we have a series of data that we collect, so things like weight and length and width of both the carapace, so the top shell, and the plastron, which is the bottom shell. So a lot of our training focuses on how you can, on ethical and safe handling of wood turtles to keep them safe and minimize stress. And this is a program where there are permitting requirements on our side. So we need our volunteers to participate in in-field training to make sure that they have the skills to go out and handle wood turtles and interact with them on our behalf. Is one of the things to think about with this program is some terrain can be challenging to survey. So I have a photo up here of site with great access. It's one that we often do kind of those community or group survey days because people can get in relatively easily. We do have sites that are just thick alder swamps. So you really have to have a strong drive and a willingness to deal with pretty mucky, uncomfortable conditions if you're going to survey one of those sites. So we will do an introductory virtual training session that's coming up in a week or so. And this is a program where we require in-field training because it's a program where people have the opportunity to directly interact with wildlife. And after people complete that training, then they get added onto our permit and they're able to undertake those activities under our permit. So we will also do additional training focused on nest surveys. You usually don't think about that until later in May because this time of year we're just trying to get all these other things on the get all these other things going. And like I said, we will be hosting group survey events. We will do what we need to do with COVID-19 in mind, but because these are outdoor events, there's plenty of opportunity for social distancing. I think it's really great for people's both physical and mental health to get out and be interacting with nature. So we're still planning to pursue some of those group events this year. So major considerations with this: if you're not in an area with wood turtles or able to travel, it may not be the best fit for you, but we are trying to work with a group of partners, including Coastal Action and Mersey Tobiatic Research Institute, to do some additional survey work for snapping turtles. So with that program, people would not be handling, so no taking of measurements with snapping turtles for semi-obvious reasons. But there's very little data about snapping turtles. So helping with that would actually be really valuable in filling some pretty major data gaps. And either of these programs, so working with wood turtles or snapping turtles, will be really good practice for in the coming year when we start to recruit and train volunteers for the Herptile Atlas project update. So Mersey Tobiatic Research Institute is currently working on their plans and getting the details together for protocol and site selection for an update to the Herptile Atlas, which was done years and years ago. And when I say herptiles, I mean reptiles and amphibians. And so we're going to be looking for a contingent of volunteers to get out probably next year, looking for all of our different reptiles and amphibians across Nova Scotia. So before I jump ahead, any questions about wood turtle visual surveys or even snapping turtle work? I don't have tons of details at this point on the Herp Atlas, but we are going to make sure we do a lot of outreach and kind of public sessions to get people involved. So there's definitely more to come on that in the future. I hear and see no questions, so I'm going to move on, but I can definitely go back to things. So the final volunteer program I'm going to talk about tonight is FrogWatch. And this is actually kind of an old Environment and Climate Change Canada program that maybe hasn't had so much attention in recent years, but we think has a lot of value for getting people out and doing some work on identifying different frog species at sites in Nova Scotia. And so the reason we became interested in this specific protocol is that we have a wetland restoration project that we're just getting started with. The site location for that is in the town of Middleton, and we're working with East Coast Aquatics to restore an infilled and drained wetland site. And we're really interested to see both the species that are in the area or maybe even on the site pre-restoration, which will be this spring, and then continue monitoring through that post-restoration phase to see if we can detect any changes. In addition to giving you a sense of what species are using a site, FrogWatch observations can be used for in a variety of ways. So based on the timing of when you're hearing observations, especially your early spring observations, it can be used to help track climate change. You can use the information to help identify positive and negative population trends, and also to add some information about range and distribution of different species. So we're kind of lucky in Nova Scotia. We have a handful, but a pretty reasonable list of frog species to learn. So we have 8 different species that we might encounter. Visually, most of them are pretty easy to tell apart. I find pickerel frog and leopard frog can be a little challenging. But we have American toad on the top left, the green frog, the wood frog on the top right, our bullfrogs, the leopard frog, which is middle right, the spring peeper, which you may have already heard this year, the mink frog, and then pickerel frog. So only 8 species, and I guess I'm jumping ahead of myself. I was going to say, this is another program where you're using their call, so you're surveying by ear. So it means there's 8 different calls that you need to learn. So it may be a challenge, but I think it's reasonable. You can challenge yourself. It's only 8 different calls. So the site that we're really interested in recruiting some volunteers to monitor is in the town of Middleton at that wetland restoration site. And so it's actually a street. I don't know that it has a name, but I don't know that it has a street sign, but it is a road. It's Schaffner Drive. And it is kind of off the main drag as you're driving into Middleton. You can drive right up and park, really easy access. But this is another program where you can find a survey site anywhere across Nova Scotia. So as long as you're looking for something that reasonably supports frogs, you can use that as your FrogWatch survey site. I see a question that came in from Devin about snapping turtle work on the Petite River. So it would be Taylor at Coastal Action, and I will message your dad with the email contact after this. But Coastal Action is planning on some work in that area. So that's great if you can help them out. So when do our FrogWatch surveys take place? Right away? Can you go out like tonight? Um, we've already had detections of spring peepers, like I mentioned, but that's okay. Anytime is a good time to start. So typically dusk is the best time to monitor. It's when you're gonna have your peak activity, but there are some frogs that are gonna call during the day. And with this program, once you select a site that you think reasonably has frogs, you're going to try to visit at least once a week. It'd be great if you can visit more. And you're going to do at least a 3-minute listening period. And in that listening period, there's a data sheet, and we'll share this when we do some more detailed training, but you're going to record the different species that you hear. And this is another program where if you're out and you're not feeling so confident about your ability to identify your frog calls by ear, they're pretty easy. You could bring, if you have a smartphone, pre-download the recording so you can play them back and just run through those 8 to check out what they are. Or you can take a recording using voice memo or whatever recording you type of app or software you have available and send those to us, and we'll work on recruiting our volunteers to work from home on confirming different species. So again, with this program, we'll do some virtual protocol training, really looking at the data sheet and what you're being asked to write on there, do some practice on the calls, and I will share a set of links with the recordings. And those are recordings you can download on your phone, so you have access to them in the field. We are going to have some group training sessions. So we have Summer Field Tech starting with us later this month, and one of her responsibilities will be to coordinate some of these group training and survey sessions. So they should be a lot of fun, and we'll definitely be hosting some at Middleton, but may try and do some additional locations. So if you live in the Watershed and you're really keen to participate and would like to see a group survey and training event happen in your area, maybe just send us an email and then I can pass that information on, and we can kind of, as to our best ability, select locations around that. And some other considerations, I think I touched on this one already. We're really interested in this Middleton wetland restoration site, but kind of think FrogWatch is an underutilized program. It's a really great one that almost anyone can do. So it's one that kids can be involved in. You don't usually have to travel too far because, again, we have lots of wetlands and other wet habitats that support frogs all across Nova Scotia. And this is another program that'll be really good practice for the Herp Atlas project. So we did have a meeting, I think last week, and talked about whether there would be kind of a survey by ear option for the Herp Atlas. And I think the decision was, yeah, we wanted to include that because it's something that's accessible to a lot of people. There's some pretty tricky things you could ask people to do, like identify different egg masses of a frog or salamander. Takes a pretty refined skill set. But listening for different calls is something a lot of different people can learn. So in terms of next steps, We do have a volunteer registration form online. So if you know you want to volunteer for something, it'd be great if you can go on and complete that form. If you know the programs that you want to participate in, you can either sign up for the virtual sessions where we'll look a lot more in detail at the protocols, or I will share the recordings of virtual sessions. And then if you have questions, you can just email or give us a call about those afterwards. Um, you can join for in-field training, particularly if you're doing wood turtle visual surveys and hoping to go out and conduct additional independent surveys, then we'll need you to join for that in-field training. And then we'll also have to work with you to identify your sites so that you can get out and begin monitoring. So I think with that, I am happy to answer any questions. And Devin, we'll be excited to have you for some wood turtle survey work. So look for in May different events being posted. And I will create mailing lists for different program areas. So if you do that volunteer registration form and indicate you're interested in wood turtles, then I'll make sure you get on the wood turtle mailing list. And that will keep you up to date on things like community survey sessions and different training dates. I should also mention we do have some other programs that we will be recruiting people for. Just wasn't quite ready to share all that information yet. So right now, Rachel Walsh is working on updates to the protocol for our volunteer angler program. So if you are a recreational angler and would be willing to record your catch data and share that with us, whether it's in a marine, brackish, or freshwater environment, we're kind of working with different partners on all different species and all different types of habitats. And you never know what else is coming up. But we are looking for recreational anglers in addition to the 3 programs I just talked about.